Okay, and good evening, everybody. And thanks to Sheila Danielson for that comment about liking the day of the week change. It's Wednesday, not Thursday. So welcome, everybody. And yeah, I've done my best to keep my forehead from shining here in the in the video. May have to start doing makeup or something to keep the shine away. So. I'm really excited about this webinar tonight. So for those of you who are new, you can participate in the live chat at any time. Feel free to chime in, ask a question, make a comment, an observation, anything like that. Please feel free. This is for you. And what we're going to do today is look at empathy as it relates to freedom, and then give you some ideas of how effective use of empathy can evoke the right idea of freedom. And I have some really good examples of that. So it's going to be here's what it is, here's what is not working, and here's what to do better. So that's going to be the sequence for tonight. And I have a couple good videos to show, and I think it'll really make you think about empathy and what it means to us as human beings, and how important that is to the type of policies that we want to see enacted, and what our government should look like and how our government should function, which is critically important considering what's happening on Friday. So away we go. And to kick things off, had a really interesting conversation with someone in Black River Falls at the workshop we did to help people organize around sand mining and give some people new ideas about how to counter a really effective message from sand mine companies about job creation and economic growth and personal property rights and things like that. And somebody was talking about empathy and how people tend to misunderstand what empathy is and how it's often confused with sympathy. And they actually suggested this Brene Brown video. And Brene Brown is a therapist who has some really great TED Talks. And I found this little clip here. So we're going to look at this brief clip of Brene Brown explaining what empathy is, and it's fun because it's animated. So without any further ado, here we go.
The ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment. Not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
When it comes to communicating our values, because I've got a slide up here that outlines what the differences are that she's talking about between empathy and sympathy. And when you think about connecting with people and their values and what that means, and the idea of feeling a moral sense of responsibility for others through that connection. Look in the empathy column. She talks about empathy fueling connection, whereas sympathy drives disconnection. The picture of the goat looking down the hole going, "Whoo, it's bad down there, want a sandwich." Think of how that drives disconnection. She talks about empathy as recognizing another person's truth so that you can stay out of judgment. And obviously when we talk about communicating our values based on empathy, we're talking about honest, authentic communication and connecting with people on that level. And then there's this idea of that she talks about with recognizing and communicating emotion and feeling with people. And what's important about that is, I've talked a lot about the unconscious, your unconscious emotions, and how your unconscious emotions drive your actions and motivate you. And that's exactly what she's talking about, communicating emotion through connections at that unconscious level so that you can actually feel with people and identify with them. And these last 2 points under empathy I like a lot. The one is where they say, I know what it's like down here, you're not alone, so that you connect with another's feelings. Whereas with sympathy, she says that sympathy is saying it's bad down there. Notice the difference between down there, where you are, as opposed to down here, where we're together. Down there, you're on your own. Down here, we're together. And then the idea of trying to fix it with things. At least you have blank, or at least you're not blank. Trying to put a positive spin on things. So, big difference between empathy and sympathy. And when it comes to empathy, talk about disconnection. There's a huge disconnection between people who are empathetic and what they communicate to voters. And I have some examples about that, and in terms of democratic strategy. And I want to differentiate between Democrats, progressives overall, and this idea of strategy. Because the people who are driving the strategy are the ones that are really making the mistakes in the messaging and how they connect or don't connect with people. Most people that I know who self-identify as Democrats or progressives, a majority of them are very empathetic people. They just have a hard time communicating it. So here's 3 examples. This is from National Democratic Strategy. The first one is from Sherry Bustos, who's a Democrat from Illinois, kind of the northwest of Chicago, and then a little bit further west than that. She's been named the new head of Democratic congressional messaging by Nancy Pelosi. And this is from an interview she did just last week. And she says the core of the new Democratic messaging and how they connect with people is this. We've got to go with where people are. Fine. We've got to listen. Okay. Makes sense. So we're looking for something for them to start being empathetic. And then she says this, which is why I've got it highlighted. We've got to talk about our policies in a way that makes sense to them. That we are about making things in America. Right? So I just want to go back to the slide comparing sympathy with empathy, right? And which one are you hearing there? You're hearing, we have to go out there, and we have to tell them about our things. and make sure that they understand our things. They're not talking about, she's not talking about communicating anything deeply emotive to people. She's talking about communicating our policies in a way that makes sense, right? So that's kind of just spin, so how they want to hear them, but they're still our policies. So that's, one example kind of what not to do. And so the next one is Tim Ryan, who's a Democrat from Ohio. And for those of you who recall, recently he challenged Nancy Pelosi for the minority leadership. And by the way, this PowerPoint will be posted with the, thanks for the question there. This PowerPoint will be posted with the video tomorrow, so that you'll be able to actually download the PowerPoint and see all the points there and make notes and everything. So just, kind of focus more on the experience and absorbing everything than taking notes too crazily. So Tim Ryan says, we better get back to a robust economic message about the future. Those are democratic issues. So right away there's, you kind of start out with this idea, okay, robust economic message about the future. We're waiting to hear what that positive vision is, and we're looking for something that we can connect with. And then he says those are democratic issues. We know how to do this much better than the Republicans, who, the Republicans already own the messaging, and yet, he's saying that those are democratic issues. Again, we're talking about things. We're talking about things that really don't necessarily connect with people, because the Republicans, Donald Trump, had a more powerful economic message that connected with people than the Democrats did, right? So where's the difference? There really isn't a difference. And the next final one, and I thought this was just, kind of too funny to pass up. So the Washington Post reported that the rollout of Democrats' messaging on the Affordable Care Act to counter the Republicans' repeal and replace message about the Affordable Care Act. And we all know what the Republicans are saying about the Affordable Care Act, right? It's government intrusion. It's taking away from your personal freedom. We can't afford it. It's big government, big brother, et cetera, et cetera. So here's the Democrats' message, which included, as the Washington Post said, an imperfect image of senators standing next to a sign that read, you're going to love this, "Make America Sick Again." Right? So going back to, I'm going to just one more time go back to the empathy, sympathy, right? If you're saying, "Make America sick again," you're saying it's bad down there, right? That's what you're saying. You're not connecting with people. We're going to fix this with a thing. It's bad down there, and we're going to do it better than Republicans. I mean, that's all they're saying. There's no real connections being made there. So from the, slide ahead there. So this is National Democratic Strategy. And this translates down to our local Democrats. And the point I want to make here is I'm not slamming on these people because they're good, empathetic people who care about others. But this is a strategy that's basically based on, as Brene Brown would point out, sympathy, not true empathy and making connections with people. So this first one is from the Wisconsin State Journal article just this week that Tammy Baldwin was interviewed to talk about what happened in the election and what Democrats are going to do moving forward. And one of the things she pointed out was that there was just too much focus on responding to Donald Trump's latest tweet, right? So that it really overtook the core agenda of Democrats. And when she says core agenda, I interpret that to mean, okay, here comes the core message, right? Which, according to Tammy Baldwin, and this is consistent with what national strategists are saying, is to help working people get ahead. So you hear that a lot, that the Democratic Party is about helping working people get ahead. Well, there's a problem with that, because that's just about one set of people. You know, when it's not connecting with people beyond working people. And working people means something. In conservative language, working people are the ones who are disciplined. Working people are the ones who have worked hard all their lives, play by the rules. Does this sound familiar? And they are morally disciplined. So yes, they will be ahead because they deserve to be ahead. And the people who aren't ahead are the ones that are just not disciplined enough, lazy, deserve their poverty, etc., etc. So this is a great example of that dominant conservative language, dominant conservative ideas working its way into what Democrats think is effective, but really isn't. So, pretty classic example there. The next example I have is going to be two slides, and it's for any of you that read the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel yesterday or saw the online story. You saw this kind of funny, tongue-in-cheek story that Dan Bice did about how Gordon Hintz, who's the Democrat from Oshkosh, assembly rep, created this bingo card so that as Scott Walker was giving his State of the State address, Democrats had this bingo card in front of them that had a number of Walker's catchphrases, such as, and of course these are really well framed, "Thanks to our reforms" was one. "The state of the state is great," another well framed. And then, "The governor has become so predictable," said Hintz, which is why they had to do this bingo card, so they wouldn't be bored listening to all his usual catchphrases. Well, I found that a really fascinating observation, because why are those catchphrases so effective? Two reasons, right? They're well framed, number one. They evoke conservative metaphors and conservative values, but also because they're said over and over and over again. So they're effective because they say them over and over again. So the irony is, of course, that here's the bingo card. It might, the picture might be a little small for you, but I can tell you what some of them are, right? "Thanks to our reforms" is one, which you heard. "The state of the state is strong." "We have a worker shortage." Guantanamo Bay, big metaphor, right? "Big, bold." Broadband expansion. "Hope, hope, hope." Here's a good one for all you people that care about public education. "I trust parents." How's that for a well-framed message? "That's real money." "The Wisconsin comeback is real." Labor participation rate. Bemoans the federal government. Right? Gas tax. Paul Ryan. So here's Democrats with all these really effective conservative metaphors with them right in front of them during the State of the State, playing bingo, like it's a game, and then kind of mocking the whole thing that, well, it's just, he's so repetitive. He says the same thing over and over again. Well, guess what? There's less Democrats in the Senate and Assembly because they say those things all the time and because they're effective. So, again, both of these slides, these last two slides, really show a disconnect between people who have empathy and them communicating empathy. And what I would like to propose to you using Joe Biden. There was a great article in New York Times Magazine. It's available online, and it's basically kind of a farewell interview with Joe Biden. And this interview says why he connects with people. And I'm just going to take a quick sip here, and I'm going to read some key things from what he said. So, Joe Biden said to the New York Times that the thing that worries him the most about repositioning is about repositioning to win back Trump voters, right? So, for example, in Wisconsin, after rural areas went overwhelmingly for Trump, there's this huge, message that went out from the state Dems saying, especially leadership, saying, we need to do a better job communicating with rural voters, right? So what Biden is saying is, I'm worried about the repositioning of who we are to win back Trump voters. And this is great. He has little patience with Democrats who want to move left or right. And then he's, all these quotes that he hears all the time. And I'm sure you've heard them all the time too. Move to the center. Move to the white guys. Move to the working class people. Double down on the social agenda. And then he says something brilliant that is really in line with what progressive values are all about. He said that that's a false choice because he's never said anything to the ACLU that I wouldn't say to the Chamber of Commerce, right? Both ends of the political spectrum, but he sticks to his values in both cases. And then he has this section where he's reciting aloud part of a campaign speech that he gave, and he says, if you live in neighborhoods like the one Jill and I grew up in, okay, he's starting to evoke empathy, real empathy. If you worry about your job and getting decent pay, right, like he and Jill did. If you worry about your children's education, if you're taking care of an elderly parent, there is only one person in this race who ... And then he looks up at the interviewer and says, I wish to hell I just kept saying the exact same thing. And I would argue that for most Democrats, again, those who create the strategy, those who dictate what the big messaging is going to be, is that they've never been saying things like that to connect with people authentically and evoking empathy. And this is where freedom comes in. So you think about somebody who is authentic, like Joe Biden, or like Bernie Sanders, or Elizabeth Warren, and you think about that in terms of where freedom comes in to this idea of empathy, right? Here's where we're going to connect freedom with empathy. Conservative freedom is about the following things. 1, your personal liberty to do X, right? To do something. 2, to do that thing, that X, keep your money, keep your guns, do whatever you want with your property, whatever it is, with no big government interference, right? Government is immoral. It impedes your personal liberty. Number 3, if you are disciplined, and therefore moral, you will be successful, and therefore what? Free, right? That's why so many people who were hurting identify with Donald Trump, because they saw in him, or they see in him, what they aspire to be. Wealthy, successful, more free. You can do anything you want when you're wealthy, right? When you have a great job, you can do anything you want, right? That's what the conservative frame, conservative idea of freedom is all about. If you are less successful, so this is point number 4, if you're less successful, you're less free. which means you just need more discipline, which means you deserve whatever pain and suffering you're going through, because that's the discipline process. Number 5, and this is the big one, you have no responsibility to others' freedom, right? Because their freedom depends on their ability to be what? Disciplined, right? Because then they'll be successful and they'll be more free, which means for conservatives, in the conservative frame, people that are living, breathing, evoking the conservative frame, there is no empathy or connection with people when they think of freedom. There doesn't have to be. Okay. So now we get to the idea of progressive freedom, and this is important. These are the ideas that we should be working on now full time, not just during election time. A lot of people have been talking about creating community centers with their county parties that connect with people, that do things for the community, that connect with people. That's what this is all about, because progressive freedom requires a connection with people, because at its core is empathy, which is the responsibility for others as yourself, which means then we can define democracy through empathy. So the responsibility for others, we can define define democracy through that. How? The next 3 points. So, public of the people, government of the people, is necessary for freedom and prosperity. Of course it is. Empathy is critical to freedom, to connect and act on our emotional connections with people, right? To help make them more free. Because when they're more free, we're more free. That's the idea, right? If others are not free, that connection, that empathy you have with them creates a moral imperative to act, which brings us full circle to why should we evoke empathy? Because the more people that feel empathy towards others, that real connection with others, the more people that will feel an unconscious imperative to act on their behalf if they observe them not being free. Right? So this is a big deal. These are the 2 biggest contrasts, and we need to start really activating this idea of progressive freedom and based on empathy. So how can we do that? Well, George Lakoff, in his post-election analysis that was titled "What the Majority Can Do," and it's a brilliant title because obviously the majority of people did not vote for the minority president. And what's really brilliant about this statement is that it actually helps us say what to do. And there are many of you who are starting to do that, and it needs to spread. Is that the idea has to be brought across, the idea that must be brought across is empathy for those in your group and in your town, right? So to me that says to get out of the closed loops, to get out of the inner circles and start being present in your community beyond your closed circles. And here's basic progressive thought. And remember, a lot of this is unconscious. People like Tammy Baldwin and Gordon Hintz and Elizabeth Warren and all the progressive people that they understand this, but they don't make it conscious. And that's a problem. Citizens care about citizens and provide public resources for all, which maximize freedom. And what Lakoff says this does is it fits in group nurturance. And what he's saying there is that so in your groups, so let's say your progressive group, your community school group, your overall community, your county, your Senate district, your state, whatever group it is, it fits this unconscious idea of in-group nurturance, that we'll take care of each other. We can work together to have a better future. The important thing is that it undermines strict father morality, which is exactly what we have to do. So instead of negating it, which is what everybody's trying to do now, everybody's trying to say, Trump's bad, he's evil, he's going to take us to hell in a handbasket, and everybody that follows him is either stupid or ignorant or doesn't know what they're talking about, right? That's negation, and we know what negation does. We need to undermine. So evoking this idea of maximizing freedom through caring about each other and then acting on that is going to be the most effective thing. So there's a lot of points on this slide, and you can see them much clearer and make some notes to yourself and use them as you need when you see it. But FDR, in his it was 1941 State of the Union, as he's talking about a country that is possibly preparing to go to war, starts talking about freedom. And he really framed freedom through empathy. And just a couple of key passages here. The first point, he's saying that a free nation, so he's evoking freedom right away, has the right to look to the leaders of business to take the lead in stimulating effort within their own group. That's brilliant. That's decades before Lakoff talking about in-group nurturance, through empathy. And he's saying that all of us, as a free nation, have the right to look to these leaders of business, to take the lead, right? Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Look what he says next, right? The best way of dealing with slackers or troublemakers, right, which are the guys that say, don't raise my taxes because my money's mine, so I earned it, blah, 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 right? Those are the slackers or troublemakers, is to shame them by patriotic example and use the sovereignty of government to save government, right? I love that one. He's saying, these people who are in the top, 0.2%, who make as much money as the bottom 50%, and call them out. They're slackers, they're troublemakers. Shame them by patriotic example and say, look, all these people who are doing their fair share to provide these resources that are necessary for freedom, they're the ones that are patriotic. You're the ones that are the slackers. You're the ones that are the troublemakers, right? And then using the sovereignty of government, that's the people. Because the next one he says is that we take strength from the things which have been done to make its people conscious of their stake in the preservation of democratic life. Right? So that's saying, look, we've all got a responsibility to do this. And making it conscious is important. Because the next one, there's nothing mysterious about the foundations of a healthy and strong democracy. I've called for personal sacrifice, and I love this one. Talk about a positive message. I'm assured of the willingness of almost all Americans to respond to that call, right? And when he says almost, he's picturing, right, the almost all, the few who don't, are going to be slackers and troublemakers and unpatriotic. And then he calls them out again. No person should try to get rich off of these programs. And the principle of tax payments in accordance with ability to pay should be constantly before our eyes. Great. Right? We're going to do what's the responsible thing to do. And then the last one. The last one is saying, going back to the idea of sovereignty of the people, right? And healthy and strong democracy. If Congress maintains these principles, The voters will put patriotism ahead of pocketbooks, will give you their applause. That's fantastic, right? Because he's saying that he relates to the people. He understands the truth of their lives, and that government of the people can act with them for a better future. It's fantastic. It's great. And nobody talks like this today. And then from there, he goes on to the four freedoms, right? He's laid this foundation, this fantastic foundation of, what democracy is and relates it to empathy. And that leads to the four freedoms, right? A world founded on four essential freedoms. And you all know these. Freedom of speech, freedom of every person, religion. Worship God or not worship God in his or her own way. Freedom from want. Economic understandings to secure a healthy peacetime life for everyone. And freedom from fear. So you all know those freedoms. They come from empathy, because they don't happen if we don't care for each other. And then finally, Lakoff talks about this moral vision to undermine authoritarianism. And FDR was faced with authoritarianism 100-fold what Trump is, with the rise of Hitler. And he provided a moral vision that countered that authoritarianism, and he did it with a positive vision based on empathy. He said that this vision is not of a distant millennium. It's for a kind of world attainable in our own time and generation. Right? We can do this. The cooperation of free countries working together in a friendly, civilized society. Right? And now here, he hits the empathy thing out of the park. The nation has placed its destiny in the hands and heads and hearts. Talk about metaphor. Of its millions of free men and women. Freedom means what? The supremacy of human rights everywhere. And he says that after he's defined what those human rights are. And then he talks about our strength being unity of purpose. And again, without empathy, without that core sense of responsibility for others and trust, you don't have unity of purpose. And that's what he's talking about. So this is fantastic stuff. And this can provide us with something we can do. I mean, I was in a meeting with some people, a while back, where somebody said, we need to start talking about the four freedoms again. And we do, because we can frame those very easily through our messages of empathy. So here's what you can do. And many of you, based on who's attending tonight, many of you are already starting this process. So number one, connect with people in your communities. And you can use social media to do that. You can use it as an organizing tool. You can use it to expand your reach. But it also means to connect with people physically outside of your circles and get out of your comfort zone. And engage in your community. Number two, engage to bring people together. Improve quality of life through the public and working together, especially people who voted for Trump, right? So set up these community groups to engage in ways that can show people how the public and working together expands their freedom and makes their life better. And then communicate about what you're doing with stories and ideas about these empathetic connections you're making with people and how they increase everyone's freedom. And all I mean by that is just, use your social media and use your platforms to talk to people about these connections you're making with people, these real deep connections where you relate to them and you create trust, and connect through mutual responsibility, and how that increases freedom. Because then what that does is it gets us to number 4. It shows people that progressives actually care about them and relate to their truths, and that you can be trusted to connect with their emotions. Because, I'm going to go to my big giant head here. So, because what's happening right now, as we saw in the last election, is that when people say that they're a Democrat, right, the immediate response from a lot of people is the wall goes up because they're defined by issues. And if people don't connect on those issues, and there's a lot of democratic issues that alienate people, then you've lost that opportunity to connect. Whereas if you start, responding through empathy and reaching out through genuine empathy, as Brene Brown said, without judgment, which is hard because, as she said, we all like to judge. When we start doing that, then we're going to start making those connections. And once you make those connections and share values, then you can start relating that to things like local schools that people in your community care about, and why your local community school is a place that is worthy of all of us continuing to invest in and work together. So it's making all those connections. So that's something that we can do right now and start spreading the word. So what I want to finish with tonight, and thank you all for, we've got some time, you've got time to put questions up, but I want to thank everybody for making the transition to the new night, and the participation tonight. The number of people on is really good, so the Wednesdays are voting well. So what I want to finish tonight with is, not sure how many of you watched President Obama's farewell address from Chicago, but there was, I happened to find highlight, kind of a highlight reel that was really good from, of all places, CNN. And he evokes exactly what we're talking about in this first couple minutes here. So listen for it, then we'll come back and see if you have any thoughts, or just share our wow moment together here. So here we go.
American, but also the middle-aged white guy who, from the outside, may seem like he's got advantages, but has seen his world upended by economic and cultural and technological change. For white Americans, it means acknowledging that the effects of slavery and Jim Crow didn't suddenly vanish in the 60s. For too many of us, it's become safer to retreat into our own bubbles, surrounded by people who look like...
Okay, hold on. For some reason, that started in the middle. So hold on a second. Let me see if I can bring it up from the beginning. Otherwise, we'll just re-queue it up here. So hold on. Sorry about that. Okay, I think we're almost there. Okay, it's thinking. I'm trying to get it to reset so that we hear it from the beginning. We'll see how it works here.
And share the same political outlook and never challenge our assumptions. If every economic issue is framed as a struggle between a hardworking white middle class and an undeserving minority, then workers of all shades are going to be left fighting for scraps while the wealthy withdraw further into their private enclaves. If we're unwilling to invest in the children of immigrants just because they don't look like us, we will diminish the prospects of our own children, because those brown kids will represent a larger and larger share of America's workforce. Our Constitution is a remarkable, beautiful gift. But it's really just a piece of parchment. It has no power on its own. We, the people, give it power. We, the people, give it meaning with our participation and with the choices that we make. Michelle LaVaughn Robinson, girl of the South Side.
Okay, for some reason it's stuck in a loop, so he's going to finish up his thank yous. For some reason, CNN thought it was important to catch his thank yous, so then we'll go back and hear the beginning. So you heard, the Constitution, the people, that idea. So it should loop around here in just a second. So.
For the past 25 years, you have not only been my wife and mother of my children, you have been my best friend. Malia and Sasha, you wore the burden of years in the spotlight so easily. Of all that I have done in my life, I am most proud to be your dad. To Joe Biden, the scrappy kid from Scranton, who became Delaware's favorite son. You were the first decision I made as a nominee, and it was the best. My fellow Americans, it has been the honor of my life to serve you. I won't stop. In fact, I will be right there with you as a citizen for all my remaining days. Yes, we can. Yes, we did. Yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you. May God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you. I can't do that. If our democracy is to work the way it should in this increasingly diverse nation, then each one of us need to try to heed the advice of a great character in American fiction, Atticus Finch, who said, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view." For blacks and other minority groups, that means tying our own very real struggles for justice to the challenges that a lot of people in this country face. Not only the refugee or the immigrant or the rural poor or the transgender American, but also the middle-aged white guy who, from the outside, may seem like he's got advantages, but has seen his world upended by economic and cultural and technological change. For white Americans, it means acknowledging that the effects of slavery and Jim Crow didn't suddenly vanish in the 60s. For too many of us, it's become safer to retreat into our own bubbles, surrounded by people who look like us and share the same political outlook and never challenge our assumptions. If every economic issue is framed as a struggle between a hardworking white middle class and an undeserving minority, then workers of all shades are going to be left fighting for scraps while the wealthy withdraw further into their private enclaves. If we're unwilling to invest in the children...
That's the spot. So he said a number of really, really important... Yeah, that's a great point that somebody just made there. This is why you don't rank the importance of different struggles. And another great observation, when you listen to that speech, when he's talking about the idea, Atticus Finch, you don't understand someone until you've walked in their shoes, and how you have to connect the rural white voter who's living in poverty with the urban African American voter who's living in poverty. And you look at the actual record, yeah, I totally understand that. There's an inauthenticity from the action to what he's saying there. But my point is, we have to make what he's saying authentic. I mean, that's the important part right there. I mean, this whole thing about, the people who are in poverty all having the same experience and the same struggles. And if they're fighting with each other, as, Merrickville 2 points out, they're ranking different struggles or identifying by different issue groups, then you're just fighting for scraps that are thrown off by the people who are really in charge. And that's what it's all about. And if we come together, through this idea of empathy and mutual responsibility and act on it, it's going to make a huge amount of difference. And I would argue that in terms of, at the county level, at the local level, this can have a huge influence way before it does. I didn't recognize your email there, Mr. Fuller. Thanks. So that's a great way to connect with people and build a movement, which is what we, at the end of the day, we want to do. So with that, you can look for those videos. The PowerPoint will be posted tomorrow morning. Thanks to everybody for coming on the change of evening here. I think this is going to be a good night for us, the Wednesday nights, and look forward to the next one. And if you got any questions, drop me a line. And until then, everybody have a great month and weekend and all that good stuff. So thanks.